is our women's program where we speak to women achievers across the spectrum, talking about female empowerment and traditional midwives or dais in India. Today we have with us activist, scholar, health educator and founder director of the NGO Matrika. Hello Janet, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome.
How did the subject of traditional midwives or dais become so close to your heart?
Well, actually about 30 years ago, I was teaching natural childbirth classes. And there were so many cesareans, so many interventions, that even though I prepared women and couples for natural childbirth, they couldn't achieve that. They couldn't have their babies the way they wanted to because of the practice of conservative and invasive obstetrics. At the same time, my friends who were in health and women's issues, they were telling me about these dais, these traditional midwives. So I thought, I don't want to import an inappropriate technology. Let me see what's happening with the dais, how they're doing natural childbirth. So that started my interest. It's that route that I followed, and since about that time, 25 years, I've been researching and learning really from the dais. Everybody's trying to teach the dais, but I wanted to learn from them.
Midwifery, or being a dai, is supposed to be one of the most ancient professions of the world. Yet society has never taken them seriously. Such little is known about them.
That's very true. However, I would question the use of the word profession, because actually, even if you look at the English word, midwife, it means with woman, or the word dai, which we use now, at least throughout India, although each area has its own individual language and word for that woman. So it's not really a profession. Some women handle traditionally within the family. So an old auntie or grandmother will become the dai of that family, or that biradri, or that caste.
Dais also practice a lot of magic rituals and rites during childbirth. Do you believe in them?
When I was first learning about one of the very common throughout the Indian subcontinent, when a woman goes into labor, or maybe if it's a difficult labor, she will open things. She will untie knots. She will take off her bangles and her jewelry. She will do all this opening in her external world. And then it's understood that as the labor progresses, the cervix, the opening to the womb, opens. So that opening happens externally, and then it happens internally. Now, most writers would actually say, look, this is superstition, this is ridiculous, and doctors would say that also. But at the same time I was learning about this, I found that in Los Angeles, the Simontons, I read widely, so in Los Angeles, these people called the Simontons, both doctors, were doing research on cancer and taking people who had cancer, teaching them how to relax and get into a meditative state, and then imagine the T cells, these cells which attack cancer cells, imagine them to come into the body and negate those cells. And in fact, scientifically, statistically, this was proven correct. Not all the time, of course, but many times it was an effective way of mitigating or at least lessening the problem of cancer. Now I figured, okay, if this is the way it is in Los Angeles with cancer, why can't in India what women are doing when they're opening externally and their body is reflected in their body opening, and everybody believes this, then why can't that also be effective? I accept it as effective. Now, nobody goes around studying this scientifically like the Simontons, but that's because these practices still exist in poor communities, rural and urban, very poor communities, and they're even being wiped out there right now because of this shift.
In your work, you have stepped outside conventional methodologies to recognize a lot of these traditions which have been deemed superstitious.
There are two key words to what you're talking about. One is methodologies, another is superstition. I think this is the reason people don't understand the value of what dais do or traditionally oriented women do with birth, is because our methodologies are, here we have medicine, here we have sociology, here we have mathematics, here we have, they're divided up. Our methodologies are very divided. And public health and health policies often are really determined by a very narrow perspective. So it's true that I've stepped out because I'm just curious. I'm a woman. I'm curious about birth. What's happening there in terms of natural childbirth? Okay, superstition. There are many, many superstitions, so-called superstitions, which are enacted before, during, not so much during, because during they're really handling the baby and handling the exact birth, and after, because there are forces at work. We have seen birth in medicine as a purely physiological process, but women have needs during the time they're in labor. They have needs. They have emotional needs. They have social needs. They have spiritual needs. They have physical needs. They have so many different levels of needs which need to be supported and understood and met. But as of now, what happens? It doesn't even matter if you're in a primary health center or if you're in a big Delhi hospital, fancy Delhi hospital, but these different levels of need are not met.
What is the correlation between these papers and your actual groundwork, your field work when you go to the grassroots levels?
Well, I'm curious, so I've learned all these things. I'll give you an example, and I just presented this in Spain actually as a part of this presentation. You see, in this area of Nundarbar district, just below the Narmada, an Adivasi area, in our research we were getting things about how the dais there, or the women there, referred to the placenta. And it was all katra or katru or something that was like what you throw away after birth. So I said, this is an Adivasi area. They can't have always called it this. Surely in our data we have other words or another word for the placenta. So sure enough, we had an Adivasi, but she said, yes, it's coming in our data. This other word, satao, is used. So what does that mean? What does satao mean in another context? Is beehive. Now I get all excited when I hear something like this, but beehive, what is a beehive? Beehive makes honey. The placenta makes a baby. Beehive is a site of activity. The placenta is a site of activity. But most importantly, when the placenta disengages from the maternal side of the womb and comes out, the structure of the placenta is exactly like the structure of a beehive. these little cotyledons, like you've seen the structure of the hive. So this is keen observation of nature, which these people did. Because I was educated, because I have the ability to write and I'm interested in this, I wrote it up. And more scholars are interested in this, and more as women come forward, and women are interested in other ways of understanding the body besides just the biomedical way, then I write papers.
Being a person of foreign origin, going into remote villages, wasn't that a challenge for you?
Yeah, language is a huge problem. I mean, because I speak very bad Hindi, but then because we're researching in different areas where there's Punjabi, now I'm talking about my current research. So there's Kannada, there's in Maharashtra the Adivasi languages, there's a huge Bengali dose of Hindi in Jharkhand where we're working. So there are many, so that alerts me more to the nuances of language and the imagery that is in language, because mainly what I work with is the English translations, but also I work with the translators. Sometimes I think if I were more proficient in one of the local languages and Hindi, that I'd be doing something much more prosaic. You know, I'd be more of a NGO, whatever, you know, not this kind of investigation. Now, in terms of people's acceptance, you know, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, in a way, there's white privilege, so there's that. But in another way, I mean, let's face it. If any of us, if we're really urbanites and we go to rural areas and try and plant ourselves, we're all kind of different, and we can't ignore that difference. So I'm just, in a way, one of many. But the way I work, and have always worked, is through NGOs and with other people. So it's like I'm part of a group. I'm not just me coming in and going, ooh.
The JIBA project, which is the field research study of midwives going into 4 remote areas of India. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, some of us who were interested in this subject, I think 3 are actually medical doctors and 1 PhD, and we're different. We're very, very different from each other. But we all recognize the value of how birth was handled by these dais and in these rural areas, and how underserved. I can't tell you the amount of what they call underserved in public health language, PHCs which weren't really functioning, and there's so many problems with having babies, which oftentimes, even with the poor, and that's who dais mainly serve these days, rural and remote areas and the poor. What you want in an ideal world, according to me, is you want the women who need to be in hospitals or in PHCs or have proper medical care, you want that to happen. But you don't want everybody in the hospital, because that only leads to overcrowding and poor care and all these other things. So it's a research project. And in order to gather information about these 4 areas, Bellary district in Karnataka, Kangra in Himachal. I mean, it's a local site in each of these areas. Jharkhand, Bokaro district, and Nandurbar, as I said, in Maharashtra. So what we're gathering is both quantitative and qualitative data. Now, let's start with quantitative, which is not my field. But anyway, quantitative, we have household surveys, we have provider interviews, other providers, We have retrospective and prospective birth surveys. So we're gathering a lot of numerical data on this phenomenon of birth. We're also getting different perspectives in this data. Now, what I work mainly on is the dai interviews, and we've held three interviews per dai with about, maybe, I'm just approximating here, probably about 75 or 80 dais in these four areas, where we go into their perspective, what they think, what they do. So we hope to build a body of evidence to convince people, particularly, I suppose, the government, but also the different players, or as the current jargon goes, stakeholders in this area of maternal child health, to convince them that we have data now, because now this data does not exist. What I'm telling you, all that I'm saying, we don't know this. It doesn't come through the ordinary channels. So Jiva is now, we've wrapped up. We've had these local researchers, about 3 in each area for two and a half years. So it's not like going in and doing a PhD thesis or dissertation in even 6 months. No, they've lived there, they've made the connections, they've interviewed people, they've established themselves, and then they've provided us with this data, which we're now processing. So this is a very exciting extension of what I've been talking about, all these different activities.
Dorothy Sayers said that whenever you find a great man, you will find a great mother or a wife standing behind him. Or so they used to say. Well, it would be interesting to know that how many great women have had great husbands or fathers behind them. So tell us a little bit more about your family.
That's a large question also. First of all, my husband loves pregnant women. He loves little babies. Very rarely would you find a man. I've attended home births where he's come shortly thereafter and he's holding this newborn infant, and in seventh heaven, communing with it in some ways. So he's supported me during this time of teaching natural childbirth classes that I talked about. But more importantly, I think, because he also does NGO type work with rivers and water. He's a geotechnical engineer by training. He's got a PhD. But he also has this ability to talk to the farmer next to the field, to anybody. He will talk to them. But he can also go to the reports, which are this thick, and with all the data, all the numerical data that's describing this field and that river and all that stuff. So he's a very talented, touch wood, he's a very talented man and very capable. My interests in childbirth kind of go along with, wanting to preserve the natural aspects of what is capable there is very analogous to his work in rivers and land, and also to a certain extent now he's into low-cost housing. So there's a resonance with our beliefs, our values, and also our capacities for how we proceed with these beliefs and these interests.
Your books and your papers are also very reflective of that. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. Although I've never taken an anthropology class in my life, I have spoken at the American Anthropological Association meeting on this subject, as I did in Spain. I sometimes call myself a barefoot anthropologist. I'm just curious. So it is true, but anthropologists have not dealt with this subject sufficiently within India. My first book was called Childbearing and Culture, The Role of the Dai as a Ritual Practitioner. This was my first book, and it was a small book which drew both on, this is very early research which I did with women's NGOs in Delhi. And then I was also reading the Purans and old Puranic and historical stuff, because to talk about this intelligently, this topic, you really have to know about sociology, about history, caste, about medicine, about so many anthropology, interviewing techniques, all these different things. So this was my PhD, not PhD, I did a master's degree, and this was my thesis that was then published as a book, Childbearing and Culture.
You moved to India 30 years ago, and you embraced the culture so beautifully, and you've actually gone into remote parts of India which people like me or the next person would not have even dreamt of going to. What's been your experience, and how did you manage to adjust so beautifully all these years?
Wonderful. Wonderful. People say, how do you like India? You know, and how does one answer a question like that? I mean, I love it and I hate it. There are things I really don't like, and there are things that I absolutely adore. And I go to rural areas because I'm interested, and I have gone lots of places, as you say, not just for work, but otherwise. I like nature, and I love rural Indian people are so wonderful, you know, oftentimes, you know, very hospitable, and yeah.
So Janet, what are your hobbies?
In the summer I love to swim, and in the winter, well, I do go to the gym. I also love reading. I read voraciously. I play computer games, which I feel very guilty about. I play with my grandchildren. What else do I do? Sometimes I cook. I enjoy cooking. I love music. And I love performances, Western classical music, also Indian classical music, but particularly dance, Indian classical dance. I enjoy very much.
It's commendable what you have done, all your research, all your work, going into remote areas, and it's so interesting for people like me and of course our viewers out there who've learned so much today about this little known community of very, very important people in our lives, who are the midwives and the dais. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for being interested in all this, because not everybody is interested in all this.
देश की उड़ान में आपका आयकर करे योगदान। अपना एडवांस टैक्स अदा करें इस महीने की 15 तारीख तक।
आप भी पा सकते हैं संतोष, बिछड़ों को मिला